Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Hello again, and welcome back to What's the Point? Another fabulous guest today. My guest is a woman who's an advocate for healthy relationships, and I love this, believes we each have a secret sauce to create the personal and professional relationships we desire. She is the owner of PRT Coaching Systems. Please welcome my guest this week, Coach Shaquan. Hi, Coach.
Yes, hi. That's where the crowd goes wild and the confetti comes down.
Yeah,
or is that at the end?
Well, it's throughout. It's throughout. You know, we add those actual special effects towards the end. So if you can't tell at this point, spoiler alert: Shaquan is an extreme extrovert who loves words, laughter, and quality time with her husband, her two sons, and her golden doodle, which I assume is a golden retriever mixed with a poodle.
You would be correct.
Okay, see, learning all the time. So let's get straight to what your business purpose is, and that is that you're an advocate for healthy relationships. And tell us more about that, please, because we could all use healthier relationships.
Yes. So my philosophy is life is all about relationships, and without them, we wouldn't have a mirror to see how other people see us. And so I like to define relationships as the way you communicate, the way you connect, and the way you show up.
Okay.
And so when thinking about that and using the word healthy, so how you have healthy communication with when you're in relationship, right? How you are connecting, a healthy connection and a healthy way of showing up. And that truly begins with the relationship you have with yourself so that you can build and have attracting and so I say like attracting and building and creating those healthy relationships with other people, whether it be personal or professional.
Okay, that sounds great. And, you know, it's very telling that you start your comments on that with the word communication, because communication is so essential. Tell us more about how you started to embrace and understand the importance of communication, in particular, personal one-to-one communication.
Yes. I don't know how far you want me to go back because I'm first thinking how I was as a child and we would be out in public and I'm talking to everybody. So if you've ever experienced that, if you've been out in the store and you've got a little kid that just asks you a question or is just like, hi, you're just like, hi. And then they start. So that was me very early on in life. And so I think communication just became something that was a core value just from a very young age. And so as I have traveled through life, I've noticed that having great communication, being having a sense of compassion for people, being curious about people, it lends an opportunity to build relationship. And so if from a spiritual perspective, and I'm a Christian, and so I believe in God, and I believe in the Bible and the scriptures. And there's one part in there, please don't quote me, but it talks about how you should speak to people, or you never know when an angel is amongst you. And so I just believe that having those communication skills that allow you to listen, be heard, advocate for yourself, learning how to have some self-control in some spaces, that communication, I say it's the key, not one style fits all, because there are, I talk about 5 different styles of communication.
Well, so a couple of things that I want to address there. First of all, the importance of communication itself. Regular listeners have heard me use this quote before because I love it, from George Bernard Shaw, that says, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it took place." Because oftentimes we talk and we assume that whomever we're speaking with understands what we mean, and oftentimes it's either not understood or it's misunderstood. And so when you just mentioned the 5 different types of listening, which I want to get into later,
Yeah.
that's really important because we all communicate differently and we all have different behavioral styles. But the other thing that came out of that
Yeah.
that I want to get from you is more of that little girl. Tell us about that
Oh
little girl
gosh.
chatting to people in the stores and on the street and on the bus.
Oh goodness. So yeah, you're gonna take me back. So I remember, so this little girl. So here's my story. So I grew up in a two-parent household. My dad worked for the postal service, and my mom is an educator. Both are retired, and so we lived in a middle class, uh, predominantly black neighborhood,
Hmm.
and all of the kids on the street went to the elementary school that was 2 blocks away, except for me. My parents sent me to the all white Lutheran school that was a couple of miles away. And so I feel like I, I, I had to somewhat advocate for myself and have a voice in both of these spaces because there was a desire to fit in where I stood out and then fit in where I was overlooked because I didn't belong, if that makes sense.
Sure, it does.
So, and I mean, who wants to hear, here I am coming home from school and they're talking about things that happened in school in the playground in my neighborhood. And I'm like, oh, well, did you all hear the one parable where, I can't remember his name, went up to the tree and waited on Jesus to come through the town. And they're like, stone faced. So I think talking and communicating was a way for me to fit in spaces where I didn't necessarily feel like I belonged.
Well, in that example, there are two places, and you had kind of what some people would call a double whammy. I mean, going to a Lutheran school with being perhaps the only black student there,
Yeah,
and having to fit in and communicate and be seen in a positive manner. And welcomed, and then getting back to your neighborhood where everyone else has no exposure to that, and you have to try to
yeah,
be seen and respected and fit in. That
yeah.
can certainly increase your communication skills. Do you feel that happened?
Absolutely. I needed to be heard in both spaces. And otherwise, it was isolation from both
Mhm.
spaces. And so I became the loud one. I was going to be the entertainer. I'm going to make you laugh. I'm going to, do this. I'm going to be that person until it turned into wanting to fit in so bad that I had to kind of figure out who I wanted to be. And
Mm.
honestly, this is so funny. If you ever, I don't know why you would, if you ever ran into a particular uncle of mine, he would go, my nickname is Shay, or my family calls me Shay. And he goes, Shay is a bully. She was such a bully. All the kids were scared of her because, and I mean, now that I'm an adult, I can admit that. So it wasn't necessarily a bully in terms of like being physically, uh,
Hmm.
bullying, but I did teach people how to treat me by fearing me. So, and it was through my communication, through my voice.
Wow, how to
Yeah.
treat you through fear. That's
Yes.
interesting. And just a side note, who knows? I may already know your uncle. Our conversation before we started recording, the people that we have in common is pretty shocking. So who knows? I'll just start asking. Let me know his name after we get off, and I'll let
I
you know.
will.
Um, So that's very
Oh,
interesting because how did people relate to your style of what your uncle calls
mhm.
bullying and what
Yeah.
you, I'm sure, thought more of as asserting yourself and holding your own or claiming your own space?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because now we can use those words. And as you're saying, advocating and speaking up and claiming my space. I didn't want anyone to, so let me go. What really happened was, third grade, my parents were starting to think about future in college. And so my sister and I are 7 years apart. So I'm third grade. She had 2 more years of high school. And my parents, their desire and their goal was to pay for us to go to college so we wouldn't have to take out any loans. And
Okay.
so as they were looking at that, they were saying, okay, well, we need to pull back from this tuition. Um, so that we can start putting that into more of a savings. My sister was getting ready to go, and then so that was kind of the determining factor, which is so funny
Your
because
excuse
tuition
me,
was
your grade school
Mhm.
tuition, the Lutheran school
My
tuition.
grade school, yeah, the
Yeah,
Lutheran, the
okay.
private school
So,
tuition,
sorry to
yes,
interrupt. Just
which
want to
was
make sure we were clear on that.
no, it's okay. No, please. Thank you for that. So yes, my Lutheran school tuition. So we already had to pay a higher tuition because we weren't members of the church. And so the first step was to join the church. And then we kind of got called out because we would go to the early service and then leave early and then go to our church. And so we really weren't members because we weren't participating. So I remember the first time my mom was like, she's fussing. She's like, they're saying that we don't spend enough time at the service and we're leaving early. And my dad's like, because you do. She's like, but it was supposed to save money, tuition or cheaper. So once that didn't work out, then we went back to paying full tuition. Now, mind you, it was like 240 something bucks a month. Where do you go anywhere these days to get that type of tuition? Please tell me, because
Yeah.
we're paying private school tuition for 2 kids here. But they were forward thinking. So when I then had to go from being at this school, which was Christian based or Lutheran based,
Mhm.
Christian based, if you will,
Yeah.
in an all white environment, to go over to this predominantly, Black school environment. I'm not sure if you will. I'll tell you from my experience, I can imagine because I know it was tough. That was, now I talk white and I think I know it all. And like all of these happen. And so in order for me not to get bullied, I had to learn how to become the bully.
Mm.
And that's when I started kind of, fighting back and kind of making people, and making, kiddish threats and I'll do this and just being mean, just a mean girl. And they liked me.
Okay.
Oh, isn't that crazy? But that's how it was. And so back to the communication thing, I think that I learned then how unconsciously learned how to say things in a way that made people say, okay, we don't want to mess with her. So let's stay on her good side or else.
That's quite a telling story. I'm kind of debating. I'm going to tell this as briefly as I can, but let me
Okay.
start by saying I have zero understanding of what it would be like to be a Black person going to a white school and then going back to an all Black environment where you're perceived to be more white. I don't get that. However,
Yeah.
I grew up as an Army dependent, so we moved every 2 years. And it was kind of similar because every time I went to a new place, I had to make new friends. I had to assess who could be a friend and who I needed to watch out for. And the same type of thing is what I took on, which is kind of a don't mess with me persona. And I'm not sure everyone liked me as much as they liked you, but it worked. And that just helps me understand. And I want our listeners to understand that we should all reflect on our childhood and our past because there's a certain thing called nurture where people teach us, but there's also kind of nature, and nature and nurture together put us in environments where as kids we learn things and we bring them forward. I think that's a good concept for us to take a look at ourselves and try to assess why we behave the way we behave, because behavior is so important in communication.
Yes, I agree, Bill. That's such a great point.
So, and tell us more about your
Yeah.
communication and there's 3 elements. I don't want to keep us stuck just on communication, but
No.
it's
Yeah.
essential.
Yes, yes, yes. And so when we talk about relationships and really get into that space, and you have me thinking really about how I got here, and really being able to learn how communication is so important. So after I went through the stage of feeling isolated and feeling like I didn't have a voice in these 2 separate spaces, to then going to one space, which was the new school,
Mhm.
and then feeling like I had to change my style of communication. I think that stayed with me throughout. Then when it came to intimate relationships, and having, a boyfriend, and how I advocated for myself and how I spoke up for myself in those relationships. And I think there was a lot of anger still from just past things that had happened that I didn't really realize how my communication was unhealthy. And then I think it happened when I met my husband. And it's so interesting. We started talking about some ground rules from the beginning before we started. He's like, I don't like to argue. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, okay, that's new because hello, I'm real good at it. Like you're taking one of my core skills away, but okay. He's like, I don't like to argue. It's like, and so I'm not going to raise my voice. I'm not going to do those things. And if you are someone that likes to argue, then this probably is not going to work out. And I'm like, now I'm like, what do you mean? I'm cute. Hello. Like, you gotta like me. What do you mean? But it was just something about that that made me start at that point realizing the importance and the value of communication styles in now at that point in intimate relationships. And then as I continue to grow and go through this journey of how I got here as Coach Shaquan, recognizing the importance and the value of understanding communication styles in the workplace as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting how that evolves, and it is interesting and essential to understand that we have the ability to adjust our behavior / communication to try to get rid of the illusion that communication took place and have it actually happen, right?
Yes, absolutely.
How different was it for you, and specifically, but then how did it affect you in more generality when your now husband said, I don't like to argue, and took that off the table?
It was new for me. This is a guy that I liked, or I wasn't sure if I liked him really. I was like, I don't know, but it was a guy. It was a guy that I liked, and I want to say this conversation probably came mm, maybe about 2 or 3 months in. We kind of gone on a couple dates, and it was just like, hey, I think we're kind of starting to like each other, and then it came, and it was just like, okay. And I had to kind of reflect. Did I say something? I do something? But he was very honest what he was looking for. He's like, I eventually want to be married and I want to have
Mhm.
a family. And um, I don't believe in that. And he didn't grow up in that type of environment either. So it wasn't hey, I grew up in a house where there was a lot of arguing and a
Mhm.
lot of, confusion. He's just like, I just don't think it's necessary. I really don't. Yeah.
So you grew up in a kind of a peaceful environment and wanted that to continue.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in some sorts, yes. And I didn't grow up in an environment. My parents weren't arguers either, and so again, that was the outside influences in me really looking to define myself because I had been. People told me who I was when I was younger. Again, coming from these two different environments of education, if you will. Uh, so they told me who I was, and so when I found that voice to say who I was, again, it wasn't anything that came from the house. So
Mhm.
it was just interesting how it ended up happening with he and I. And I will say we've been married. It'll be 17 years this year, and we have had. I tell people on one hand, I think it's like four to five, and I'm air quoting arguments because I've had friends tell me that we don't know how to argue because it's like, well, I don't agree, honey. And it's like, well, what? And so it just really goes. It's like this really, just well, honey, and it's well, honey, and it's babe, and it's this, and they're like, what is this?
Yeah.
This isn't arguing.
Well, yeah, and it's not. And I think that's terrific. And I think it's great that people notice it because in reality, who really benefits from arguing, but having discussions and realizing that you
Yeah.
have different views and different thoughts on things and being able to address them without a ton of negative emotion brought it to bear is a pretty amazing trait. And that I suspect helps you bring that into your coaching.
Yes, yes. So we're getting there. So yeah, so that's part of when I thought about relationships, and that's where we got on that communication piece.
Yeah.
That's what I thought about, in terms of relationships and just using my own personal experience and recognizing. And I mentioned this a little bit that there's 5 styles of communication,
Mhm.
and so may I share those if that's
Oh, yeah, please do.
okay? Sure. So the first one is going to be aggressive. Aggressive communication is, again, it has this energy tone towards it. And so another part of, I teach on energy, two types of energy. One is called anabolic energy, which is healing, constructive, and success focused. And the other is called catabolic energy. And catabolic is draining, destructive, and fear based. And so energy also is attached to our communication. And so when you think of an aggressive communicator, it's very catabolic, it's very draining, it's very destructive, and it's fear based. And so it can be button pushing, it can be condescending, it can be where you really, again, teach people how to fear you. So you have this ego, if you will, that says you can say and do whatever you want, and it doesn't matter how it impacts or affects anyone, and no one's going to challenge you on that aggressive communication style. And so, again, having this very catabolic energy to it. Our next style would be passive aggressive. And so passive aggressive is kind of saying things that lead to it really doesn't bother me, or I don't care, yet you're aggressively telling them to do what you say. So something passive aggressive. And as a parent, I find myself, and even knowing this, sometimes I do it with my kids, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's fine. If you want to do it that way, then you go right ahead. Just remember, I told you what was going to happen. That's a little aggressive, but it's passive. Like, no, go ahead. Do it. No, you're just passing that aggressive. So you don't have to be accountable for what you say and what you do. Our next one is going to be submissive. And so when you have a submissive communication, you are really holding back, not saying much, not advocating for yourself, kind of going along with the flow. As an example, just as I was speaking about my marriage, I found myself being in a submissive communicator, where it would be my husband would simply say, "Hey, what do you want for dinner?" "Oh, I don't care. It doesn't matter." He's like, "You sure?" I'm like, "No, it doesn't matter. We can have, you want to grab some this, you want to grab Mexican, you want to grab, some Italian, you want to, I don't care." And he's like, "Yeah, I think I want pizza." And I'm like, and then I get mad. "I don't want pizza." Like, he always gets to choose pizza. Why do I, but I submit it. Like, I didn't advocate. I don't know. Does it sound familiar? Is anybody out there? Is it just me? Right?
Well, I just wanted to ask you that real quickly because submissive, and I'm trying to tell you what I understood what you just said to mean. Submissive means not giving a definitive response, which if someone says, "What do you want to eat?" and you say, "It doesn't matter," and it really truly doesn't matter, that's one thing. Yeah. If it's, yes, "Well, I'm not going to throw this in there because hopefully you'll hit on what I want, but just don't hit on pizza because I get." Yeah. So is that fair? I mean, submissive is as I'm just trying to understand. Help me. Submissive, as you describe it, is holding back something that you actually feel or believe or have thoughts on, versus genuinely just not caring. Right?
Absolutely. You nailed it. Yes. And I know that we can think about submissive and what that term really means. In this sense of communication, it is truly people that submissive is as I submit to whatever you say. Right. So I'm just kind of pulling back. So to your point, yes, you really, like in those cases, I really did want something specific. I either wanted him to read my mind and pick what I said, or, I mean, that's what I really wanted. I was like, because me, I don't want, or it then gave me an excuse to feel sorry for myself. Like, oh, I never get to pick. He always gets to pick what we have for dinner. Well, I was being submissive in the way that I was communicating, and I wasn't aware.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That is how I was doing, right? And so that's an intimate. There's another way that goes in terms of business and style. And some people are submissive at work, and then they're aggressive at home because they are, they kind of get tired of not having a voice in the workplace. And then they come home and that aggressive communication really comes out. Or they're aggressive at work. And I had a client tell me one time, she's like, she's like, I go to work, I hunt the pig, I kill the pig, I clean the pig, I cook the pig, I serve the pig, and then I got to clean up every mess that I make. She's like, so when I come home, I don't want a pig. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't care, And so it's like, So it's just interesting how those styles of communication can shift depending on what space you're in. So that was a caveat in there. So we've got aggressive, we've got passive aggressive, we've got submissive. Our next one would be manipulative.
Okay.
Being a manipulative communicator, people often are unconscious of being manipulative. And the way that this particular way shows up is it's when you indirectly ask for your needs to get met. Okay. Indirectly ask. So I've got tons of examples for husband and wife or partners, I should say, in intimate relationships, as well as in the corporate space. Here's another personal example that I like to tell. My husband and I will be, kitchen is clean, kids is when our kids were younger, we have the kids off to bed. I'm sitting on the couch, we're getting ready to catch up on some DVR shows, and he'll say, "Hey, you need anything before I sit down?" And I go, "No, I'm good." And as soon as he sits down, I go, "Dang, I should have got some water." And he'll go, you know, he's like, "I just asked you if you needed some." I was like, I was like, "Don't worry about it. I'll get it. I'll get it. I'll get it on the next commercial." So we'll be sitting here. He's like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sure." "Do you want me to get you some water?" I'm like, "No, I'm fine. I'm going to get it. Don't, you know." And then after that third cough, Bill, and he'll get up and he'll go to the kitchen and he'll give me water. And I come and I go, "Thanks, babe. Oh my God, you're so sweet. Thank you so much." And then I put the water down, and guess what? I never drink it.
And the cough's gone away.
And the cough's gone away.
It's magic.
So it's magic. So really it was, if I didn't care. Like, I was gonna get up and get the water in this particular case. I was gonna get up and get it at some point, but my conversation manipulated him into feeling like he had to do it for me. And oftentimes we don't realize what that looks like in terms of communication, and it makes the other person feel very obligated, or like they have to help you or have to do something for you, even if you don't ask for it. So it's an interesting style, and once you are familiar with it, you can pick it up in people's conversation. But it's interesting.
Yeah. So, in your experience, is manipulative communication something that the communicator is aware that they're doing, or is it a style that they have adopted and don't really see it as manipulative?
Your latter, the latter. From my experience, people are unaware. They're completely unaware, and so you use that style. And it's interesting because sometimes a manipulative communicator then communicates with a submissive is that so someone with a manipulative style usually is connected to someone that has a submissive style, right? Because I'm just going to kind of pull back, or I'm going to do whatever I think that I need to do or you want me to do, by the way you communicated that, and not really, again, advocating for myself in that space. So it's very interesting how these styles kind of show up again, which goes back to why it's so important to be mindful of the style of communication that you're using as you're in relationship with people, because we're talking about the difference that could be very detrimental versus what could be more healthy.
Yeah. And just to clarify, when you talk relationship, it can be a personal relationship, your example of your marriage, or it can be a business relationship,
Yes.
or a social relationship, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. When we talk about the manipulative communication style in terms of professional or in the off or workplace, uh, it can look very similar to, like, "Oh my gosh, I got to run this report. Bill asked me to run this report, and I'm just so overwhelmed, and I have something to do." Well, you got a coworker that's listening, and that coworker would say, "Hey, Shaquan, do you want me to run the report?" And I'm like, "No, don't worry about it. I got it." And then 5 minutes later, I'm clicking. I'm like, "Ugh, Bill wants this report, and I gotta go. Like, I gotta go pick my kids up. And I told Bill that I had to go pick my kids up, and I had to leave. And he wants this report. And so then the coworker's like, "You know what, Shaquan, go. Your kids are more important. I'll
Yeah.
run the report for Bill, and just leave your email up, and I'll send it from your email." And you're like, "Are you sure?" Well,
I don't know if you're that good at that because you've studied this so long, or if you're just that good at that.
I think it's a little of both.
Okay. Okay.
Ah, yes. And so our fifth one. Our fifth one is going to be assertive. Assertive communication. Assertive is where you are positioning yourself to advocate for yourself. You're very conscious of not attacking or accusing. Very speaking from your perspective, being in a position to speak. To listen and be heard. And so people who have a very assertive style of communication are easily or more easily able to influence the outcome of the conversation or the communication, and not in a manipulative way where you get what you want. It's really, how can I influence someone else into this healthy conversation, and so that we can create a win-win outcome.
Okay. So two things. First, explain for me and all of the listeners how aggressive and assertive are different, because you're nodding your head. You've heard
Yeah.
this a million times, but I
Yeah.
think you've heard it because it's a very important point.
Yes. Yes, it is. Um, we get this all the time when we're doing our leadership trainings and the communication comes up. And it's like, well, how do you know the difference? Because there are some people who think that they're being assertive when they're really, it's aggressive. So there are certain words that you can use that would determine and distinguish the difference. And again, remember, I talked about the difference between an anabolic energy and catabolic energy. So just a refresher, anabolic is healing, constructive, and success focused. So that's going to be tied to assertive communication, where catabolic is draining, destructive, and fear based. That's going to be tied more to aggressive communication. And so here are some words that stand out when you use the word but. So I say, if you believe it, understand it, and trust it, you don't need a but in your sentence. So if you and I are talking and I say, Bill, I understand what you're saying, but what I really want you to know is that's not going to, and so I go on. Well, aggressive style would say, you completely ignored what you said. You said, I understand what you're saying, but, well,
Mm-hmm.
as a receiver of that, it becomes very aggressive because it's telling me, you know what? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Say what you want to say, move on. Here's what I really want you to do, or here's what I really mean, or here's what you should really think. That comes off very aggressive, right?
Okay.
And so, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does 100%. And that leads perfectly into one of the other things I wanted to speak with you about, Coach, is how these different styles can be perceived by the receiver. So I would think that a lot of people would look at someone who is assertive and interpret that as aggressive, even if they're not using the words like you just
Yeah.
described. So, and I'm going to use that to set up one more thing and then yield back to you. But is there a sixth style, one that I would advocate, and that is collaborative communication?
Ooh, I got to update my notes. Come on, Bill. I'm a student and a teacher. Teach me.
Well, that's the nice thing when professionals and coaches with experience talk. We do exactly that. We
Yes.
we lift each other, we teach each other, and that's why
Love it.
coaches are important.
Yes, I love it. Now that's the point. Did you catch
Well,
that? Did you catch that?
someone should, I did. Someone should do a podcast. No, so to me, collaborative, and again, I'll lead this back into the receiving side, because you've talked about five styles of delivering communication. But to me, collaborative, and a lot of the work I do is behavior based and understanding communication and the differences. Collaborative is communicating in such a way to take into account how the person you're communicating with or communicating, quote, air quotes, to will
Sounds
best
like it.
receive that. Because
Yeah.
if we don't, again, some people might take assertive as aggressive. Some people may take passive aggressive as whatever. I don't know. So I defer to you. Teach me.
So, well, I just have to take that down. I definitely, I'm curious, and so I'm going to get my Google fingers to working after we hang up here and see if I can if you have any resources, I would love to read upon that. Like, I know what the word collaboration means.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious in terms of a communication style. I might have to update some of my documents and put you a little a credit on the side of that. My first thought is pay attention to the way it makes you feel. So as a receiver, there is, and again, I'm using this energy term. There is a feeling that you get when someone communicates with you. And so for me, when I know that when I hear someone who is aggressive, the way it feels, it'll hit me.
Mhm.
Now, again, I'm in a position where I know how to go through the steps, and I can do a real quick check from head to toe and get myself together before I respond. And if I say, oh, how did it make me feel? Okay, was that about me or was it about them? Is that triggering an old memory or old thought? Before I begin to blame and judge or shut down because of what I'm assuming is aggressive,
Mhm.
I can do that head to toe in less than probably 15 seconds. And that might be a stretch,
Mhm.
right? And so that then becomes important. Then if it's like, I didn't feel any of that. So that was an assertive way of saying it. And what can I pull from that? Because that assertiveness still triggered something in me. And it's possibly a truth that I either have, that I was unaware of, or I have ignored, or something, especially if it's feedback or someone giving you some information.
Mhm.
Um, there's body language that's involved in that. Now, again, if we're in this space, you can kind of see if someone is being more aggressive. You can kind of see the body language and the feeling and that energy. You can really feel um, when someone is being assertive. Then it feels more. Sometimes it can be a tone. Sometimes it can
Mhm.
be the timing. Sometimes it can be a technique. Like, are they using you said, you did, you? That feels very aggressive.
Mhm.
If I'm in an assertive place, it'll be I feel, I this, and then defer back to the other person. So there's still little tidbits of like, if it goes here, then this. If they say this, then this. That would kind of lead you to, is it aggressive or is it assertive? And so
Mhm.
you will then know how to respond. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes 100% sense. And what I
Okay.
like is that you present this in a way that, uh, as I see it, we have to understand kind of the basics
Yeah.
and each of the five categories in your case before we can really drill down and go deeper in it and understand that what you just said, the bing bang bong, or how everything bounces off of everything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we have to have a way to start, and I think your five elements are terrific. So let me do a slight shift here, um,
Okay.
because well, where do I want to go next? Let me change where I was going to go and take you on another little trip in the Wayback Time machine. Um,
Okay.
Before you got into coaching, before you started doing the work that you're doing, you spent a lot of time, more than a decade, in corporate America. How
Yes.
did you get into that? And you don't have to tell me the details of the company, that's up to
Yeah.
you. And how did you then segue from corporate America to doing what you're doing now, coaching? Because that's something that I share, that path.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that um, my experience was, I did not work when I was in high school. I didn't get my first job. It was until my summer of my freshman year in college, and it was with Today's Temporary. If you remember the temp agency
Mhm.
years, it's called Today's Temporary, and so that was my first experience in working. So I did, I said I did a 5 year stint because by the fourth year in college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. So I had an extra year. And so when I graduated, I had no experience. My parents, coming from Starkville, Mississippi, and working, on farms and in the fields and all of these, they wanted a better chance. So their idea for us was, you go to school, you get good grades, you get a degree in business, and you work. Like, that was the path. And so here I am now with no work experience. I graduated from college and I'm like, okay, now I just got to find a job. And I had some connections and was able to get hired on at this company. And I didn't really know anything about corporate. I just didn't. I just didn't know anything really.
Mhm.
I didn't know the game. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know what you were supposed to say and what you weren't supposed to say. Like I didn't have any of that type of training, and so I think that it really prevented me from understanding the politics, honestly,
Mhm.
behind it. The some of the racial injustices that were happening, some of the microaggressions that were, I just wasn't aware. I just thought it was normal. You just sit back and you shut up and you do your work because you're lucky to have a job. And it just got to a point where I at this time I had gotten married. I had had my first child and I was on the second child. And I think that's when it really started kicking in that there's got to be something different. I felt completely unfulfilled and drained and lost. And I'm like, ugh. Like I started to get so upset at everything. I didn't like the people. I didn't like the pay. I didn't like the projects. I didn't like anything. I didn't have the purpose behind it. And it started to reflect in my work. And so I remember saying, like, I like relationships. People kept, like, the whole relationship thing kept pulling on me. And it was about intimate relationships at the time. And so I was like, I'm going to go back to school and be a counselor. I'm going to be a relationship counselor.
Mhm.
And then I was like, you're not going to do that. Right. I had never um, invested anything. My parents paid for me to go to college. My parents paid for my wedding. My parents, like things that you think about that you would really have to invest your own money into or anything. So when it came to me going back to school, I'm like, how do people pay to go to school? And they're like, you take out a loan. I'm like, what? I didn't even, like, I couldn't even fathom that idea. And here I am, I'm somebody's wife and somebody's mom. And
Mhm.
I didn't even have a clue. And so once I realized that if I wanted to do something else, I was going to have to make an investment in myself. And so I talked to my husband. I'm like, I kind of want to do this coaching program. It's going to be like 10K. And he's like, okay, where? And I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to get the money. I'm like, I don't have 10K just laying around. And so when it came, it was like, oh, you take out a loan. I'm like, okay, this is what people really do. I'm like, all right, I'll take out a loan. And so took out a loan, got a coaching certification, and in the process of getting the certification, I had just tapped out mentally. I was honestly about to be fired, and it was just for me, it's truly an assignment in God's plan that I was able to walk away with a severance
Mhm.
because of my years of service, and they knew it was time for me to go. I knew it was time for me to go, and
Yeah.
I literally went from employee to entrepreneur in like 2 weeks with no plan. Seriously, I had no plan,
Yeah.
none.
Well, I
I
mean,
just knew like,
sometimes that's what it takes for us to move on.
yeah,
Again, I've got a similar story, and getting to that point, not on my second child, but getting to the point of not liking where I was, not believing, not respecting, not agreeing with, and all that kind of stuff. I was an absolutely horrible employee. But that started actually that situation when I moved to doing things on my own is actually the genesis. I didn't know it then. I do now, hindsight being what it is.
mm,
That was the genesis for the whole my question of what's the point.
yeah, yeah,
When I was there, what's the point? I didn't ask myself that enough, and I want our listeners to ask themselves that
yes,
in a work situation. If you're miserable, what's the point? What are you trying to do? So
hmm,
the conversation has been absolutely terrific, and I'm
yeah,
afraid that I might run a little bit long. So I want to move to two different areas before we hit the hour, and the first is. My whole life, I've had a very easy time of finding BS. People tell me I'm always, a BS or full of BS. But now, for the second time in the last month or so, I've got a guest who works in the field of BS. So Licky Lavji, who was a guest a short while ago, talks about
yes,
getting rid of the BS in your life, and by that he means blind spots. You talk
hmm,
about BS in a different manner. You talk and define BS as belief systems. Expand on
yes.
that for us.
Yes, yes. And so, if you've ever seen me on social media or anything, I got to do the visual because I go, you got to check your BS. And I do like this little snap thing, and people love it, right? It's this thing that's connected to it. So I say, do you like that? You like that, Bill? Is that
Well,
cool?
if you're not watching this on YouTube, you have to just for that. And see, I can't do your work because I can't snap my fingers like that. But so anyway,
So we have to give them a time marker so that they can go back and make sure they get that part.
yeah, it's about 45 minutes in.
Okay, so check your BS. I say check your BS, or where BS stands for belief system, or whatever has you stuck in a pattern of thinking or way of doing that doesn't allow you to move forward or reach a goal or let go of something or someone. And so, understanding that our belief system is defined by a group of habitual thoughts that we place our trust and confidence in, and then we use the feelings to determine what's good, bad, right, or wrong. Okay? So, belief system, a group of habitual thoughts that we place our trust and confidence in, and we use our feelings to determine what's good, bad, right, or wrong. And the understanding is that we all have a belief system that was created from three sources: what we were taught, what we experience, and what we assume.
Mm.
Okay? What you were taught, what you experience, and what you assume. And those belief systems are truly a reflection of our thought action pattern. So the things that we think, the formula is thoughts create feelings, feelings create emotions, emotions create actions. So what you think becomes what you do. And if you do not check the belief system, right,
Mhm.
where your belief is coming from, then your actions could be out of alignment with either who you say you are, with what you say you want to do, with who you think you are. And that's the process of going through and challenging what you think, check what you believe, so you can choose how you want to show up
Mhm.
in personal and professional relationships.
And that is as significant a comment as I think I've had on this show, because it so clearly defines and brings me back to what I had not done, where I was out of sync with my belief systems, and rather than having the knowledge or the strength or the courage, whatever the case might be, to kind of take a look
Yeah.
at that and ask myself, what's the point? Uh, I stayed miserable for a long time and have been learning ever since. So I applaud you for that. And those of you listening, if you're walking or running or at the gym or wherever you're listening, driving, I know you'll want to go back and write this down because there's so much amazing information coming here.
Thank you.
Coach Shaquan, thank you for that. And there's so much more that you do that we could talk about. But like I said, we're running
Yes.
up against the hour. I invite everyone to meet Coach Shaquan at least through social media, all of which will be in the show notes. Visit her website, Coach Shaquan Speaks. That's SHAQUAN, CoachShaquanSpeaks.com. Um, and and again, your story and your information is so rich and so plentiful. But I can't let you go without asking you directly, what's the point?
Hmm. There's a true belief for me that we were all created for a specific purpose, and uh, many are called, few are chosen. And it truly feels like this is who I was created to be.
Mhm.
And if I can say something or do something that draws someone closer to their spiritual connection, their purpose, then we can get back to building the kingdom, really get back to being in alignment and bring relationships together. And again, I'm not specifically talking about intimate relationships. With everything that's going on in our world, racial division, political division, like the BS is all over the place. And so, if we can get back to the point of checking it,
Yeah,
um, you know, imagine what type of world we can be.
I love that. I love the fact that it's very hopeful for our future. I love the fact that it's very actionable. Oftentimes we hear people with nice theories, but what you talk about is very actionable. And that's why I'll again encourage everyone to visit CoachShaquanSpeaks.com, check the show notes, connect with her on social media and
Yes.
continue the conversation. And thank you so much for your time and your insights
Thank
and
you,
your
Bill.
energy.
I appreciate you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.